Good evening and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Amanda Bowen. We're so happy you could join us this evening. As always, we've got a phone number there at the bottom of the screen, 1-800-472-0391, and that's where you can find a forecast recording for your area 24 hours a day. If you have internet access, you can also visit us online at weather.gov/Alaska. If you live in the northern part of the state, you can personalize that to weather.gov/Fairbanks. For the southern and southwestern portions of the state, that can be weather.gov/Anchorage. And for southeastern portions of the state, including the Panhandle, you can make that weather.gov/Juneau for more personalized local information. And as always, you can email us anytime with any comments or feedback that you have at nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. Now, as we're ramping up the weather today into tomorrow, we actually have some high pressure over the Panhandle today, which is bringing some sun to the area. So this is from a little bit earlier this afternoon in Juneau. You can see plenty of sun there in Juneau. I know there was some sun yesterday, but then clouds moved in. So more sun today. And while a lot of the rest of the state is going to be seeing rain and wind with a strong low pressure system moving in over the next couple of days, you've got high pressure in command over the Panhandle that is going to make it a very different story there, with maybe even some more sun in the coming days. Speaking of that strong low pressure system and the impacts that it's going to be bringing to some of the rest of the state over the coming days, we do have one watch and one advisory that are going to be out for Sunday and Monday. The watch is a high wind watch for the Alaska range. Through the passes, we're expecting strong southerly winds on Sunday. So if you are driving on Richardson Highway or Parks Highway through the Alaska range, make sure that you are aware of the possibility of high winds. Looks like sustained winds 40 to 50 miles per hour with gusts possible as high as 70 miles per hour through those passes. So that could make travel difficult, especially for high profile vehicles. So if you're driving a big truck or other high profile vehicle and you can delay your travel through the Alaska range, might be a good idea to do so. Otherwise, make sure to stay tuned for more information in tomorrow's show about this, and make sure that if you have access to the internet, you can keep up with the latest on our website, weather.gov/Alaska. We also have a high surf advisory that's going to be in effect for Monday for portions of the southwestern portion of the state from about Hooper Bay towards the southeast along the Bering coast. So that high surf advisory is going to mean that the surf is going to be well higher than usual, and we could see some beach erosion with this low pressure system moving through and the winds on the back side of it. We're also looking at plenty of rain with this system over the coming days. So the River Forecast Center is looking at not flooding per se, but significant rises on local streams and rivers due to the heavy rain. Now that's going to be for most of the southwestern portion of the state, including the Kuskokwim and Yukon rivers, at least the lower portions of them, as well as the eastern portion of the Alaska Peninsula up into the western Alaska range, that is, as well as Kodiak Island and the North Gulf Coast, including the eastern Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound areas, and the coast stretching to about Yakutat. So this is for 3 p.m. today to 3 p.m. on Monday, Labor Day. So if you're in any of these areas that are highlighted in green, just be aware of the water levels on local streams and rivers, and with that heavy rain, be aware that they may come up significantly, although at this point we are not expecting flooding on those rivers. Again, this situation could change, so stay tuned to our show for further updates, as well as weather.gov/Alaska. Moving on to our satellite loops for today, we can see clouds associated with our first low pressure system starting to move northward into the Alaska Peninsula. We can also see a little bit of that counterclockwise swirl associated with that low pressure system. To the south of that, we see more clouds just starting to move into the frame this afternoon. That's going to be from a stronger low that's behind this first low, and over the next couple of days, that stronger low to the south is going to absorb that weaker low currently crossing the Alaska Peninsula and strengthen, and that's going to be what ends up being our strong low coming into the southern Bering tomorrow and into Monday. For today's weather, we have that low that we just saw on the satellite imagery spinning just south of the Alaska Peninsula, about 991 millibars, and it's going to be bringing some rain into the Alaska Peninsula today with the possibility for heavy rain for that central Alaska Peninsula area, as well as into Kodiak Island. We have high pressure centered over the northern Gulf and western portions of the state for now. So a dry day for the northern Gulf, and in fact, plenty of sun from Kenai Peninsula to Yakutat and even the central panhandle, as we saw that plenty of sun in Juneau with that webcam imagery earlier. We're also looking at some sun along the west coast, although we're still expecting some fog for it this afternoon and into tonight for portions of the northern Seward Peninsula. So maybe not seeing the sun as much there, but dry conditions nonetheless. We do have a chance for some showers across the northeastern interior as well as the Brooks Range today, with fog continuing along the north slope and some rain along the Chukchi Sea and Chukchi Sea coast combining with that fog. For tonight, we can start to see our stronger low just pushing up into the southern portion of the picture, 982 millibars, so significantly stronger than that low that was pushing up into the Alaska Peninsula today. Again, that weaker low is going to get absorbed into the stronger low as both of them continue to move north. So we're looking at continued rain across southwestern coastal portions of the state, as well as the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and much of the Aleutians, with again the potential for heavy rain, but tonight shifting to the southern portions of the Alaska Peninsula. High pressure still in command over the northern Gulf and eastern interior, as well as over the west coast. It's going to bring dry conditions, but with those dry conditions and clear conditions across the interior, we'll see fog formation tonight in the lowlands along the Yukon River, as well as north of the Alaska Range. Also expect fog to continue for the northern Seward Peninsula, stretching up into the Chukchi Sea and Chukchi Sea coast. We're looking at some showers across the Brooks Range as well as the Chukchi Sea coast, with snow in the higher terrain of the Brooks Range. We also have a warm front stretching across most of the Gulf for tonight. That's going to be bringing some potential rain into the extreme southern portions of the Panhandle. But from the central Panhandle north, it looks like more dry weather and clear skies, with the potential for some fog development again tonight in the central Panhandle. For Sunday, we start to see that low really move north and strengthen, 982 millibars. Tomorrow's just north of the eastern Aleutians, that is, in the Bering Sea, bringing rain further north into southwestern portions of the state, as well as the western Alaska Range, up to about Nome on the northern end. We're looking at the possibility for some heavy rain across the Yukon Delta. So again, that's one of those areas we're keeping an eye on for significant rises on local rivers and streams. High pressure over the Panhandle will keep the Panhandle dry with this system, and high pressure also over the Beaufort Sea will keep the North Slope dry for now, although that fog may not dissipate during the day on Sunday. For Monday, we are looking at that low weakening over the west coast, but bringing rain to most of the state. So we are looking at rain from the North Slope all the way to the northern Gulf, with the exception maybe of the southern Panhandle on Monday. For low temperatures on Sunday morning, it's going to be another cool one with temperatures in the 30s for much of the interior, 40s for Southwest, and a mix of 30s and 40s for the Panhandle. Sunday afternoon, a warm one in the Panhandle with temperatures in the mid 60s with all that sun, but cooler for the mainland as well as the Aleutians with temperatures in the 50s and 40s for the North Slope. Monday morning, a little bit warmer than Sunday morning with all of that rain and cloud cover. So looking at 40s for most of the state with 50s for the Alaska Peninsula and some 50s for the Panhandle, mid 30s for the North Slope on Monday. And then Monday afternoon, another warm one, especially for the southern Panhandle with temperatures possibly topping out around 70 or the low 70s, but more seasonable weather for the mainland.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to your aviation forecast. For Sunday morning flying weather, we're looking at IFR conditions developing along the eastern Aleutians as well as the southern extent of the Alaska Peninsula and up into the Bristol Bay area. Also some IFR conditions over the Chukchi Sea and the Chukchi Sea coast and coming into the southern Panhandle. For Sunday afternoon, improvement for the mainland as well as the Chukchi Sea coast and the Panhandle, but we do have IFR conditions continuing to spread north with that low pressure system into the YK Delta as well as up to about St. Matthew Island in the Bering. For Monday morning, IFR conditions remaining from about Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island, south through Nunivak Island, the Pribilofs, and down through the eastern Aleutians. Also IFR conditions for the Bristol Bay coast as well as portions of the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and the eastern Kenai. For Monday afternoon, some improvement for the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula to MVFR conditions. Most of the Kenai improving to MVFR or VFR, but we do have IFR conditions developing along much of the North Gulf Coast from Prince William Sound east into the coastal northern Panhandle. Also IFR conditions for the northern tier of the state north of the Brooks Range and extending up into the Bering to the northern portion of Seward Peninsula. Pass conditions on Sunday, AKwx Pass expected to start out the day MVFR but improving to VFR on Sunday afternoon. Same thing at Adigan Pass, MVFR improving to VFR. Lake Clark and Merrill Passes both expected to be MVFR on Sunday. Rainy Pass VFR on Sunday as well as Windy Pass VFR on Sunday. Isabel Pass also VFR on Sunday as well as Mentasta Pass VFR on Sunday. Tanita Pass VFR and Portage Pass starting the day out MVFR improving to VFR, but on the east side of Portage Pass we do expect to continue to see MVFR conditions through the day on Sunday. Finally, Chilkoot and White Passes both expected to be VFR through the day on Sunday. Freezing levels on the east side of our low pressure system that's going to be moving north of the Aleutians, we do have our warm air. So freezing levels as high as 12 to 14,000 feet over the southern Panhandle, 8 to 10,000 feet over the northern Alaska Peninsula and south central as well as the northern Gulf Coast, 6,000 feet for a majority of the mainland with 4,000 feet stretching from the western tip of St. Lawrence Island up through the North Slope, and 2,000 foot freezing levels over the Chukchi Sea and immediate Chukchi Sea coast on Sunday. For icing, we have isolated moderate icing over pretty much the entirety of the Aleutians and into the Bering above about 8,000 feet. Also isolated moderate above 8,000 feet for much of the North Slope and the eastern Brooks Range, and above 6,000 feet for the Chukchi Sea and the Chukchi Sea coast. Jet stream winds on Sunday will have our main jet associated with that low pressure system that's going to be moving up into the Aleutians. So to the east side of that jet, or the east side of that low, we'll have a jet out of the south and southwest, 125 to 145 knots, just south of the Alaska Peninsula. Also, that jet continuing over the Panhandle, 115 to 125 knots out of the west. 9,000 foot winds on Sunday, low pressure in the same place with our highest winds also around the same place, stretching from the southern Alaska Peninsula south into the Pacific Ocean, 60 to 65 knots out of the southwest and south. And again, we have a secondary jet over just south actually of the Panhandle, 40 to 45 knots out of the west, and another one to the north side of the low, stretching from southwestern Alaska southwest into the Bering. That's going to be 45 knots out of the east. For 3,000-foot winds, again, our strongest winds over the Alaska Peninsula, 65 knots out of the south. But we do have a secondary jet out of the south and east, stretching from Bristol Bay towards the west into the Bering Sea. Turbulence on Sunday. We do have some isolated severe turbulence associated with the strong winds on the north side of this low pressure system. So that's going to be stretching across most of the Alaska Peninsula and up into the Bristol Bay area. Again, that's isolated severe turbulence below 4,000 feet on Sunday. Also considerable moderate for St. Lawrence Island and the Aleutians below 3,000 feet. Stay tuned for more Alaska weather after this.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, joined once again by the science liaison of GINA, Eric Stevens. GINA, of course, is the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And GINA is all about satellites, and Eric is always here to tell some really cool stuff about satellites. Now, the last time you were here, we talked about how the weather satellites can see clouds and what's under the clouds, but you're telling me that satellites can do a lot more, even protect the general public with aviation safety information.
That's right. There's one particular aspect of satellites we're going to talk about today that might not be immediately obvious, and that is detecting things in the atmosphere that are not clouds, that are not snow, not rain, but rather a hazard that can happen here in Alaska, and that is volcanic ash.
Of course.
When a volcano goes off, puts ash in the air, this is of course a hazard to the public if the ash were to fall on the ground in accumulating amounts.
Sure.
Additionally, while the ash is in the air, and this is the more frequent hazard, is it's a hazard to aviation because you cannot fly an airplane into volcanic ash without great risk. Worst case scenario, the ash gets into a jet engine, wrecks the engine, kills the engine, and now you have an airplane flying with no engines. It won't fly for long. So aviators need to avoid that ash. How do you avoid the ash? You have to know where it is by identifying it with a satellite image and perhaps predicting then where the ash will flow with the overall weather patterns. Satellites are so important for identifying when a volcano goes off and then tracking the ash after the volcano injects the ash into the atmosphere.
Now, are you talking about seeing the heat signature or a huge volcanic plume with a cloud that we're used to seeing in the really pretty pictures of any Alaska volcano that's erupted recently, Redoubt, for example? Or are we talking about the really fine details? Because this is polar orbiting satellites, the ones that are very low to the ground, right?
The geostationary satellites can do some detection. The polar orbiters, like you say, they're closer to the Earth. They give the even better view. In answer to your question, I would say all of the above.
Oh, okay.
A heat signature from a volcano going off with all the heat that comes with the eruption, that can be identified in infrared imagery. Okay. We've got images from the Kamchatka Peninsula. That's the far eastern part of Russia on the western side of the Bering Sea, loaded with volcanoes.
Right.
You know, Alaska has plenty of volcanoes of its own. We can also be affected when a volcano goes off in Kamchatka, say, and then the weather carries that ash toward Alaska from the west.
Right.
You can see the infrared heat signature, like you say. Also, the ash in the air can be detected by doing some sophisticated channel differencing within the satellite data. You can find the identification of sulfur dioxide, say, that's a component of the volcanic emission, and you can trace this with the satellite imagery. Sometimes volcanoes go off that haven't gone off before, and we're not expecting them to go off. Say if there's no seismometers around a given volcano that hasn't gone off in 100 years, you might not be expecting it to go off in the satellite imagery. Since satellites can be globally comprehensive, that might be the first sign that you have that a volcano in an unexpected area is going off.
So it's a good backup system. Okay.
Right.
Wow.
Right. And people are working all the time on automating the interrogation of satellite data by computers to provide a first alert to a human, so the software will say, we think this might be important. Human, go take a closer look. Because the people are still the best way to interrogate the imagery, but the planet's a big place, and we can't be looking everywhere all the time, so the software helps give a first cut. And then in Alaska, there's a special kind of surprise angle where the satellites are helpful, and that is the Katmai eruption of 1912. huge eruption. There is still somewhat of a moonscape out there in southwest Alaska where all this ash is laying on the ground. And sometimes a strong weather pattern comes along where we have roaring northwest winds that go across the Alaska Peninsula there and can actually pick some of this ash up off the ground. No volcano is going off. This was more than 100 years ago that volcano actually blew. So you're not going to see a heat signature like we were discussing. There will be no seismic signature of a volcano going off. So those data sets, they'll say, oh, no problem. But you can see in some of the satellite imagery this ash, as it's called, resuspended. When the wind comes along, picks it up, the ash can be lofted a few thousand feet in the air just with the wind. And an airplane flying into that plume is exposed to some danger. So we need to track that ash to provide guidance to aviators that you don't want to be flying here at these elevations in this area. We've got some imagery of the resuspension, and you can see the wind blowing strongly from the northwest, picking up the ash and blowing it down to the southeast. And so that's another, perhaps not immediately obvious hazard of volcanic ash. Katmai is the gift that keeps on giving, for sure.
Very good. So we've got satellites that can help us understand the weather from the past and the immediate past. And we talked last time about how that's feeding into the forecast modeling to help improve predictions. But now they're also protecting the general public with aviation-sensitive information and watching volcanoes, whether they're erupting or maybe have erupted in the past, and finding the left-behinds from those volcanic events there. So really impressive stuff. Eric, thanks so much for joining us again today. And you're a gift that keeps on giving from the satellite community, so thanks a lot, and we hope to have you back again soon. Again, Eric Stevens with Dehne at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And if you'd like to check out any of the information that Eric has shared with us again today, you can do that very easily by going to www.dehne.alaska.edu. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts.
Moving to a look at your marine forecast and starting with the sea ice edge, we're seeing the same trends that we've been seeing the last few days with melting along the edge itself, as well as some high concentration ice moving into the eastern Beaufort Sea from the Canadian waters. Winds and seas over southeast, we've got relatively light winds across the board, 10 to 15 knots, generally out of the east and southeast for the Gulf, but some northerly flow over the inside waterways, also 10 to 15 knots. We have winds increasing in the Gulf on Monday, as the area will be on the periphery of the impacts of a strong low pressure system making landfall on the mainland. So still 10 to 15 knots for the southern Gulf, but 25 to 35 knots out of the south and southeast for the northern Gulf, 10 to 15 knots of wind for the inside waterways. We also have those seas coming up in the Gulf, anywhere from 7 to 11 feet, peaking in the northern Gulf waters. For Sunday across south central, we've got strong easterly flow as that low moves north into the Bristol Bay area. So that strongest wind is going to be near the Barrens between Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak Island, 45 knots out of the east. So conditions deteriorating quickly in that area on Sunday. Seas also rising quite quickly, 12 to 24 feet, mostly wind driven with those strong winds in the area. Heading into Monday, down in that area, we'll see lighter winds, still 25 to 30 knots, but winds increasing through the rest of the Gulf and in fact the rest of South Central, 25 to 40 knots generally out of the south for the northern Gulf, 30 knots out of the southeast for Prince William Sound, and 25 to 30 knots for Cook Inlet. Seas also coming up through most of the Gulf, 11 to 15 feet, 6 feet in Prince William Sound, and 6 to 9 feet for Cook Inlet on Monday. Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island areas, this is where we're going to see some of our strongest winds associated with this low coming across the eastern Aleutians. So we've got 50 knots out of the southeast for Bristol Bay on Sunday, along with 14-foot seas, 35 to 40 knot winds generally out of the south and east across the board for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island on Sunday. Heading into Monday, a little bit of relief, but not a whole lot really. Winds and seas really remaining high as that low moves slowly off to the north. So still 40 knots of wind on the Bering and Bristol Bay side of the peninsula on Monday, 30 to 35 knots on the Gulf side. For the Aleutian chain on Sunday, we are looking at just the west side of the low pressure system mostly. In fact, it's going to be centered just north of Unalaska. So to the east side of that low, we'll have southerly flow, and the west side of that low will see northerly flow, 25 to about 35 knots across the board, seas 12 to 15 feet. Going into Monday, winds are coming down a little bit, but still remain quite elevated with strong small craft advisory winds or even some gales, especially near Unalaska. Generally westerly and southwesterly flow, 25 to 35 knots, a little bit lighter for the western Aleutians, 20 knots, and seas still remain quite elevated, anywhere from 8 to about 16 feet. West Coast conditions on Sunday will be ahead of that low pressure system at this point. So northerly and northeasterly flow around that low pressure system, 25 to as much as 45 knots of wind, and seas quite elevated, 13 to 17 feet for the Bering. And then as we head further north towards St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound, 5 to 7 feet. Going into Monday, that low pressure system is deteriorating, but it's still going to be in the area. So we'll still see some strong winds, especially on the south side of that low, 30 to 40 knots out of the west and southwest on the south side of that low, and then again out of the north on the west side of that low, 25 to 30 knots, so still elevated winds on the north side for Norton Sound. Arctic coast on Sunday, 10 to 15 knots of flow on the north slope as well as in the Chukchi Sea. We can see those winds though coming up on the south side of the Bering Strait at 30 knots. And then we see all of it increasing on Monday with the impacts of that low pressure system, 15 to 20 knots for the north slope and 25 to 30 knots for the Chukchi Sea. Tonight we have our low starting to enter the picture with winds and rain starting to increase across the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutians.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.